Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It's Geoff Mosher, and we've got Andrew DiCecco here on this Inside the Birds podcast, presented by our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City, the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. So listen up. This is what it's like right now. This is Inside the Birds. We are all over the country. Adam Kaplan is on his West Coast tour that he does every year as part of his training camp tour. Andrew is back in the Philadelphia area at his place, and I'm in Florida. I'm stuck. Worst places in the world to be stuck, but we went down to visit my mother over the weekend. A quick dip down here to West Palm, and then my flight gets canceled. And not only do I not, Andrew, was I not able to get back like later in not delayed. They just canceled my flight. I'm back on Sunday, not Monday, but Tuesday. I won't
Oh,
get a
wow.
flight. Yeah, Tuesday. I
Are
don't
you a
get.
golfer?
I would love to be. I don't have my clubs with me. I don't
Right.
have. Yeah, I can't golf with like a rent. I mean, I guess I could, but I also have my family with me, so it's not like I can go out and take 5 hours and go golf. So, but hey, you listen. There's worse places in the world to be stuck, but this is where we are with ITB right now. We're all over the place.
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a very busy time of the year for us.
Well, I was going to bring that up. It is a very busy time. This is a great time to do an Inside the Birds pod or any kind of football teams pod because, Andrew, we're really getting into the thick of training, the heart of training camp. It feels for some like it's been, especially for you who's at every practice, right? It might feel like an eternity already. I used to feel by the first week of August that I had been there 7, 8, even though you're only there 8 or 9 practices, it feels like a whole month, but it's not. The pads really just came out 2 practices ago. They've only had the one open practice at the Linc, but this is a big week because they'll have 4 consecutive practices. They already have one on Sunday that we'll talk about. And then obviously the first preseason game against the Ravens on Friday, you'll be at that. But Andrew, I think the big thing so far with these practices, and you wrote about this on Sunday after Sunday's practice, is that they're longer. They continue to be longer. As the pads come out, you can feel the competition, the intensity rise. And even though the Sunday practice was supposed to be what they call a yellow practice, which is moderate, you felt like it was a little bit more what? How would you describe it? More intense?
Yeah, even despite the I thought there was pretty welcome conditions today. It wasn't overly humid, Jeff. I still thought that there was a little chippy, even for it, all things considered, particularly with the safeties and linebackers. I thought they were really getting after it, particularly Zach Bond. Strike, he's been a finisher all camp. That kind of flies under the radar, but he flies to the football and he makes sure he plays to the sideline if that's where he's going. Jeremiah Trotter was really active today. I thought he really did some good things. He tagged Grant Calcaterra to limit him on a catch, and Van Sumeren kind of stormed through to stop Lou Nichols on a run, shut that down, and he was pretty fired up too. And then Bradbury had some nice little pops. I thought Tristan McCollum was really active, and it was really noteworthy because you see the intensity start to ratchet up a little bit, and it's right in time for that first preseason game. But I really thought that today was a really productive practice.
Yeah, Sunday's practice productive. And so the funny thing is there's always at least one camp fight. And it may not be as big, they don't hit like they used to. So you don't see in Eagles camp. You might see them in Steelers camp or Ravens camp or Chiefs, but Eagles, you don't see those full out team brawls that
Mhm.
I don't know, some people would look forward to every summer. But Adam and I would say ever since they started doing more thud practices, which is where you're not supposed the pads are out, probably like Sunday, right? The pads are out. You're tagging, you're thudding, you're causing collision, but you're not supposed to tackle to the ground. That actually is the cause usually of more fights than tackling to the ground because there's an expectation with thud that you're not going to hit me that hard. You're not going to tackle me. You're just going to two-hand touch me. But then, as you just mentioned, there's always a few guys who play to the whistle and they tag you. It's not just tag, it's like a stole. They shove you, right? They stole you right in the back. And then somebody turns around and be like, why are you hitting me like that? And then bam, that's what
Yeah,
usually starts it.
I thought, yeah, I was watching it early because Joseph Ngata was getting out on blocking Keely Ringo pretty physically on the perimeter there, and I watched it go again, and he blocked him to the whistle, and I didn't look like Ringo liked that too much, but there was no jawing or anything. I just thought, man, if the pads were on, there might be some fireworks, but no, there hasn't been anything like that. The closest thing, Jeff, was the first day of pads. Zach Vaughn got blocked by Fred Johnson, black on his backside. He got up and he didn't really he took exception to it, and Fred Johnson walked away laughing. But that was the closest. That was the closest thing. You see, Big Fred, he's 6'7".
Yeah.
That's not a guy you usually want to tangle with, but nothing close has occurred like that.
No, nothing like our old that we always talk about, our old John Runyon versus Jason Short bouts that would go on during training camp because Short was this linebacker special teamer always trying to make the team, and Runyon's an established vet, and Short plays every single snap like it's his last snap, and Runyon's just trying to get through the day. Those guys would go at it, and it would be some real. I can't call it a clash of titans because Jason Short was not as big, nearly as big as
He was
Runyon, but it would
crazy
be
though. He
he
was
was
crazy though.
crazy. He was right. He's the type of guy you don't want to fight. He's just crazy, and you just there's no rules with those kind of guys. But Runyon, there was really not too many rules with him either. So
Yeah, it's
he's one
true.
of the few guys who could probably take on Jason and not be a little bit weirded out by how crazy Jason could get.
Yeah.
Uh, but no, it's important because you got 4 straight practices, right? I mean, they went through a stretch. We talked about this, me and Adam, on the last pod, where they didn't practice for 3 out of 4 days, right? It was very odd. Then they had the open camp practice we'll get into, and then of course now they've got 4 straight. Then they'll have an off day or a walkthrough, whatever, before they get into their Friday preseason game against the Ravens.
Baltimore Ravens, yeah.
Yeah, you'll be at that. So I just wanted to start this pod real quick because we're not going to do every single position, right? But I had a really interesting text discussion with you the other day that I thought it would be interesting if our listeners heard about it because it really was a conversation that sort of encompasses how difficult tra- covering training camp can be. First of all, you have everything going on one field. It's very hard to pay attention to everything, right?
Sometimes things are going on multiple fields at the same time.
Of course. So sometimes you have to go to camp and say, this is what I'm going to focus on today and write about that, as opposed to going to camp saying, I'm going to write about all the great things that I see or all the interesting things I see because, you're limiting yourself there. You may miss a whole bunch of things that were even better to write about. Either way, it's not an exact science. And I think one of the issues is every year we talk about camp and who are the camp standouts and who's playing well, right? And certainly there are players that who perform well do that in the regular season, right? But then inevitably by October, Adam and I and you and we're probably saying things like, training camp didn't matter. And we say it every year. What you saw in training camp didn't matter. So the question is, how do we make training camp matter the right way so that what we're reporting is important and not just, you don't just dismiss it as, well, this doesn't matter because it's training camp. And here's the complexity, and I'll get your viewpoint on it. When we go to camp, most of the times we're writing about things that stand out to us for positive reasons most of the time, right? A great catch or a rising player who's consistently in the right spot or, a defensive lineman who's causing a lot of pressure or disruption, right? And that's what catches our attention. So we write it down and we write it that way. And I was talking to you about like, what if we literally took the opposite of that? Every time we saw something good happen, we wrote down the bad part of it, the player who got beat, right? The
Yeah,
player who was in the wrong spot, everything that was bad, and wrote it up that way. Then it would be just as, I think, misleading, but just the opposite way,
sure.
because we would get to the season and good players who we wrote poor bad things about in training camp, we'd say, well, training camp didn't matter. They're obviously playing well now. So it's tricky to find that balance. I thought you did a good job the other day of talking about a Jalen Hurts, right? Where you mentioned that Jalen Hurts has looked very smooth in practice. The balls very rarely hit the ground. He hasn't thrown an interception, but you also threw in an observation that there are times you noticed where he's still holding on to the ball. He's enjoying the advantage of being a quarterback at training camp where you're not going to get hit, you're not going to get sacked. Hold on to the ball a little bit too long. I was watching some video that I was able to get from the open practice, and I was watching it. And on the touchdown drive, I think it was the first one where he hit Goddard in the end
Yeah,
zone.
in the left corner, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a play about 2 plays before the touchdown where he scrambled and ran out of bounds to the left side. And I've watched that play 100 times, and I think he should have been sacked on that. He would have been
He would have been, yeah.
sacked on that play. And if he's not only sacked, but there are about two guys converging on him. Now, again, maybe that's not Jalen. Maybe that's offensive line. But either way, he was holding on the ball for a while. The defense converged on him, and nobody touched him. So then he ran to the left side, ran out of bounds. Who knows what happens if he's actually hit? Could fumble, could throw a pick, any type of thing could happen. But you generally look at that drive, right, and say it was a great drive because they went down the field and scored a touchdown.
Sure.
So this is the complexity for us as reporters, is that we don't want to bombard our readers with everything 100% positive. That's not fair. We don't want to then do the reverse and bombard every time something good's happened, we only write the bad part of it, right? That's not fair either. How do we find that middle level common ground? Because I think no matter what we do, it does feel like 70 to 75% of what we write observationally, whether it's you, whether it's me, Adam, anybody, right, tends to be toward the this was a good player or this was a player doing a good thing. And that's the tough part of camp. And how have you observed it, and what kind of things do you do to sort of make sure that you're almost checking yourself in that regard?
Yeah, well, first thing I like to do is I usually watch practice by myself and I take copious notes. And you have so much data with training camp that you have to be able to, comb through it and assess what's real and what's something I need to delve a little bit deeper into. There's context, right? Context matters, whether it be depth chart seating. Well, like today, Zach McPherson saw second team reps. Well, context would tell you is because Eli Ricks was out with an illness and Josh Jobe was limited with a concussion. So
Hmm.
there's certain things like on defense, they're shuffling guys in and out of the lineup. So you never want to make too much of one thing. Sometimes you like to you kind of you jot down some notes, whether it be Keely Ringo starting one day with the first team or whether it be Isaiah Rodgers, and you kind of keep tabs on that. But then you really have to monitor that throughout the preseason. In the game situation, certain guys that you see standing out now maybe playing deep into the fourth quarter in the preseason. So that kind of gives you an idea of where they stand. So
Hmm.
you really do have to, I want to say, really assess it very closely because you have to know what's legitimate and what's something that was just maybe a byproduct of that day or exclusive to that day. You know what I mean? So it's definitely, it's like you said, it's a complexity for sure.
Yeah. And then there's the other part about really not knowing the individual assignments. Obviously, we're not in the meeting rooms. We're not behind closed doors. A big part of why Adam and I have started Inside the Birds a long time ago and brought you in and have grown it is because we felt like we were able to give people information they couldn't get anywhere else. And a lot of that includes ourselves. We would go to training camp, we'd see things, then we try to run it by people that we really trust and know. And there were plenty of times where a person will say, "Hey, you know what? All the reporters are writing about this guy doing well because he ran fast, or because he caught the ball, or because he looks like he's causing a lot of pressure." When in reality, it's not like that. It's a little bit different. This person doesn't, is freelancing, or it looks good in a practice, but it won't parlay to a game, right? So we rely more on the sourcing and the information to validate or devalidate some observations we may have made, and that's really important from an inside the bird standpoint. And I've always thought that it would be great if there could be sort of an intervention between reporters, both Eagles and nationally, right, with coaches on how to cover training camp, the right way to cover, without necessarily teams having to give up, you know, all their intel, but be able to help reporters cover training camp better. It's not a perfect science, and I sometimes think for some, right, it's too misleading. And
That's where
I'm
it
a
comes
victim
to
of it. I
that's
was it younger, and I've grown past it, but I wish as a industry we could do better.
Yeah, I think that's where it comes to, asking questions. Like you said, ask questions. So use your resources and, you know, whether it be assignment based, there's been plenty of times last season. Hey, on that play there, were you expecting help? Like, I try to it's important to understand the full scope of the play because at
Yep.
first glance, you could be thinking one thing when in reality it was something else. So, I tend to ask a lot of questions to gather as much information as possible.
Really smart maneuver. Smart thing to do. All right, good stuff. Let's continue to talk about the Eagles here. We'll get into some offensive observations. We'll get into our defensive observations. As we always do, we're going to start off talking about some recent transactions and some injuries. The tight end, bottom of the roster tight end carousel is now swinging as the Eagles had to waive because of an injury, the tight end McAllen Castles, and then to clear well that cleared room for them to claim off waivers a tight end from the Jets by the name of Kelvin Fulch. I hope I
Kevin
pronounced
Foch.
that. Kevin Fulch. Yes, that's right. Kevin, not Kelvin. Kevin Fulch. Hopefully, I pronounced Fulch correctly. McAllen Castles. He got hurt, I think, in the
Open
was it
practice
the
during
open
the
practice, right?
first live period.
Yeah, yeah. So we will see what becomes of his future. How did you? I mean, was he doing anything that was noteworthy to you?
Not really. I thought he would be a practice squad guy. He caught some passes. I thought he showed some growth. He's a little bit of older for a rookie,
Mhm.
and I thought he did some good things. I was looking forward to seeing him in the preseason, but I don't think it's going to move the needle at all in terms of developmental prospect. We'll probably end up on injured reserve, and we'll see where that goes. But there's somebody else who we'll talk about later who I thought we were looking at depth tight end. I thought EJ Jenkins did some good things today. You have a couple other guys there, Alberto Cuevanam and CJ Uzama. So in the grand scheme of things, obviously it's a bummer for him because he had an opportunity to put some good tape out there. But in the grand scheme of the roster complexion, it doesn't mean a whole lot.
All right. So for the, I don't know, the huge number of University of New Haven alums who also happen to listen to Inside the Birds. I mean, it's got to be a huge number, right? Tell us what
Significant.
you know about, yeah, of course. Tell us what you know about Kevin Fulch.
So my understanding is the Eagles were among several teams, over a dozen teams that showed pre-draft interest in him. I know that he had his pro day at UConn at the request of the Kansas City Chiefs, who really liked him. Had a good pro day. He ran a 4.67,
Hmm.
6'4", 250. So he's a big kid, and I was told he can play physical. But obviously he doesn't even. He's wearing number 43, by the way. For those who are really interested, he didn't even have his last name on his jersey today. So
Oh
it's
my
been kind of
gosh.
a whirlwind of sorts for him. But that's a little bit of a background on Kevin Foch.
Yeah, it's interesting because he was signed by the Panthers, I believe, as an undrafted rookie, and he didn't even get a chance, I think, to compete with them. I don't know if he went to OTA because he was with the Jets about 2 weeks after he signed. So I don't know if he signed right after the draft or sometime later in the process and then just didn't make it with them and was on the Jets. But the Eagles are already his third team.
Yeah, in a matter of months.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So good luck to Kevin Folsch. Let's get to some injuries. It appears, obviously Tyler Steen. You hope to have him back sometime this week. We'll see. He's dealing with the ankle injury that's already caused him to miss pretty much all but the first two practices, correct? It was pretty
I
early in the
think I think the
process.
third one was where he got banged up.
Right.
It
That's the
was
one he
that
got hurt.
Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mekhi Becton was filling in for him. He was out on Sunday with an illness. So now
Hmm.
you're on your third string right guard on Sunday. And that, I mean, you could have pulled that out of the hat, but it wound up being Brett Toth of all
Yes.
people. Yeah. Thought that was kind of interesting because of all the other different kind of guards they have, whether it's, Darian Kennard who can play both
Matt
or Nick
Hennessy.
Gates, Matt Hennessy, Matt Sharping. But yeah, Brett Toth gets the fill-in spot there. All right, so let's talk about this. Could this be the first uh-oh for Paris Campbell because he missed Sunday's practice with a groin injury, and this is a guy who say what you want about him, but the first discussion you have to have when it comes to Paris Campbell is can he stay healthy? And now he's out with a groin. Do you have any intel on whether this is going to be a while or just a little bit of a thing?
Well, when I first got word that it was a groin for a guy who relies on speed and plays that position, that's an injury that tends to linger a little bit, and you know
Yeah.
his track record with injuries, and he's doing pretty well during camp. So, I mean, to have that setback when you have an open competition is not ideal at all. But those injuries tend to linger. But I imagine it's going to be a day-to-day situation. But there are other guys there. Britton Covey had a good day today. Johnny Wilson had a really good day, and he's opened some eyes over the past few practices. So it's not a slam dunk, Jeff, that Paris Campbell's going to be the three, especially with the uncertain future. With you don't know what the setback means for him.
Yeah, this is one guy who can't really afford to miss time only because and while he seems like the number three receiver naturally, I mean, you just mentioned other guys having good practices, and this is a spot that's very fluid. And the less time he's able to get out there and show he can stay healthy and productive, the more time he's going to give to other guys you just mentioned to try to win that spot. So, or make Howie Roseman have to rethink his options there altogether. Also on the offensive line, Landon Dickerson, he did practice mostly on Sunday, right? Did they list him as limited, or did he just not always not
No,
take
he
all the
wasn't
first
listed
team
as
reps?
limited. He practiced, but I think the fact that Trevor Keegan was working in at left guard probably just to limit the over any potential overload and kind of maybe gradually implement him back into the lineup.
Yeah. Okay. So Trevor Keegan, obviously the rookie, who has also been what of a surprise in that they've
Yeah.
gotten him on the first team at times ahead of some others, continued to get reps there. So that must have been a pretty interesting Andrew first offense with Brett Toth at right guard and Trevor Keegan at times at left guard.
Yeah, I was really keying in on Brett Toth because that was a really interesting addition to that offensive line today, right? The Eagles obviously Jeff Stoutland loves him some Brett Toth because Brett's played center, he's played tackle, he's played guard,
Hmm.
but I thought he held up relatively well given the circumstances. Trevor Keegan to me though is somebody who I think has maximized his opportunities largely. There's obviously moments where you're reminded that he's a fifth round pick, but I think that overall you see the toughness and the physicality there with him. It's interesting. I think he's certainly going to be on the team, but it's a matter of I think he has a prominent future with the Eagles if he's able to stay healthy.
That's interesting. Okay, yeah, if he's able to stay healthy, these Michigan guys, man, they get a lot of beat up, especially the ones who played for Jim Harbaugh. And we did see Keegan he came out of one practice early in camp, but then he got right back in the next day, so that was good for him. On defense, not looking great for Oren Burks, who I thought was a good veteran free agent signing from the 49ers at inside linebacker. He hurt his knee in the first practice, and he
Yeah,
has not
during
yet.
individuals.
Oh man, individuals, and he hasn't been back since. So we'll keep seeing. Obviously, other guys. We'll talk about this position later because other guys are getting some good opportunities there. Illness for Eli Ricks, so he didn't practice Sunday. Mekhi Garner has a hamstring, so apparently, if your name was Mekhi, you did not practice on Sunday, as Becton and Garner were both out. And we'll have to just see on how long this is rough for the Eagles because Garner had been practicing right at safety,
Mhm.
even though he's kind of a hybrid, and this is one area where the Eagles are not very deep.
No, Garner was mostly working with the third team. By comparison, Tristan McCollum, they both were promoted from the practice squad 3 times last year. Tristan was working with the second team mostly. And,
Mhm.
and Garner is like a hybrid player, but he kind of almost looks like a quasi linebacker. He's built sort of like a Kaiser White. They even wear the same number. I certainly don't view him as a corner. So it's interesting to see where he fits into the equation, possibly an intriguing practice squad addition for the second year in a row, and maybe you can kind of hone his skill set. But obviously, I think he still has an uphill battle because there are a couple players in front of him, including James Bradbury and Avonte Maddox.
Yeah. So is Maddox the third string safety along with
So now
Garner? Will it be
it's
Andre
been
Sam
Bradbury and Maddox
as
with
third
Quinyon
string?
Mitchell seeing a lot of first team work at nickel,
Hmm.
and then
Interesting.
McCollum will sometimes work with the second team as well.
Got it. Mixing and matching continues. Brandon Smith, inside linebackers, was out with a concussion, and Josh Jobe also out with a concussion. Now, these two guys are both on defense, and there was no tackling to the ground yet. Them both did they hit each other on one play? I'm not trying to be facetious. Did
No,
they?
I don't
I'm
know.
just wondering how two guys got concussions in a practice where there's not a whole lot of hitting going on unless they ran into each other.
Well, Josh had his first. He was on the list for the open practice, and then today Brandon Smith was on the list. So I
Ah,
don't know. Maybe it was on a special teams drill where they were. I'm not exactly sure, but certainly both players need to be out there because they're on the bubble of making the Eagles, and I think Josh Jobe has a better shot than Brandon Smith. I know you're a Penn State guy, but listen. There's not a lot of suspense anymore when you're cutting down the roster because there's 53 you keep. There's 16 on the practice squad, so most of these guys are going to probably be here in some capacity. But
mhm.
I think Job has a legitimate shot at making the 53 for special teams purposes. But you certainly don't want to see any sort of a setback there with a concussion. You don't want to mess with that.
No, no. Hopefully, these guys were able to get through the protocol pretty quickly, and nothing's too serious. And the other injuries we already know about. Cooper DeJean, he's hoping to be. He's got the hamstring. He's on NFI, active NFI still. hoping to have him back by mid-August to or at least he can start practicing a little. Sidney Brown, he's on active PUP. He's coming back from the ACL injury. I was hoping, and I'm still am, that at sometime in August you'll see him. I remember they did this. We talked about it in a recent pod with Rodney McLeod, who was older at the time, but you would watch Rodney out there practicing, and he would look good. They were just being very cautious with him at the age. When you're at training camp, do you see Sydney working out on a different field, just with the trainers and everything?
A lot of times I see him stacked behind the secondary, sort of taking those mental reps, going through the motions. But then today, Jeff, it was I happened to look up and he was sprinting from one sideline to the other to get back on the defensive side. And he looked pretty good. I mean, he looked good in the spring, to be honest with you. Could be more of a gradual, cautious approach with him. You don't want to see any sort of a lingering issue there. But I think he looks pretty good. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back early into the season.
So, in my history, knowing these kind of players, young players who you're being cautious with, very often you see them come off a list like this, or active PUP or even NFI after the first preseason game. Why? Well, A, you want to give yourself enough time to see the process through. B, you know that about a week into camp, seven, it depends what year it is and what time, but about 6 or 7 practices in is when the pads come out, right? You don't want to start off a guy off this list immediately as contact practices are starting. So you want at least a good couple of weeks. You want a couple of padded practices down because then they start to go out of pads, then maybe ramp it back up again for the second or third preseason game. So we'll see. The biggest times I've noticed is after a preseason game, whether it's the first or the second, for a guy to come off the list, because there's the day off before the game, there's the day off after the game, and then there's a practice. And then when you start to stack the games week after week, you're not practicing as much because each game has a day off before and after. So if you want to bring a young guy off a list like that, you'll be able to do that and ease him in. It's not going to be like a stack and stack and stack of practices, and you don't have to play him in the preseason game if you don't want. But eventually, especially given the state of the safety, I think the Eagles are going to want, as long as he's passing through the protocol for his knee rehab fine, which it looks like he's been able to do, they are going to want to probably get him out there and start getting him ready to be in some kind of training camp shape. So we'll see after the first preseason game. If not, we'll see after the second.
Yeah, he looks like he's itching to get back out there, and he's been moving around pretty well. So I've always I maintained in everything that I've written and said over the airwaves that he looked to be somebody that was fully intent on beating the timeline. He even said as much to me on locker room cleanout day, and it looks like he really put in the work to get that recovery on track, and he looks pretty good. So we'll have to see how that goes. But I've always thought that he was going to be available early in the season.
Yeah, I would think so too. Yeah, and I bet you, is his brother Chase a twin?
I don't know if they're twins.
Okay,
I don't
thought
think
they
so.
might be twins, but maybe not. But either way, his brother's making all these headlines in Bengals camp, and he's out there on PUP. He wants to be out there, right? He wants to represent that name and be able to contribute in his own way.
Now, if he was out there today, there may have been some fireworks because he does like to hit. He flies around.
It might be another reason they're keeping him on both for a little bit. Yeah, he is definitely that kind of guy. All right, let's get into the offensive observations first. We'll stop for a second to hear a word from our friends at Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City.
Go to get your game on. Go for the beers. Go for the cheers. Go for the hit and the hits. Go for the stakes and the stakes. Go to get your parlay on. Go to get your party on. Go for the scene. Go for the screens. Go for the gallery. Go for the win. Go to Ocean. Visit theoceanac.com to plan your visit.
All right, a reminder, we have unveiled our new Patreon tiers for our Patreon subscribers, our great Patreon community. It's patreon.com/InsideTheBirds. We now have 3 tiers. We have the normal tier that was $8. Now we've got the $12 tier where we've added a show called, well, not just added a show, but we're making sure all the podcasts are ad free. You get to listen to the podcast early on the Patreon channel. It gets uploaded immediately with 0 ads, 0 reads, 0 commercials. In fact, our Patreon members aren't hearing me say this right now. because this is considered part of a read, right? So they're probably not hearing this. I might leave it in. We'll see. But that's the benefit of that. You didn't have to hear any other advertisements or reads. And of course, we're adding the show. It's a monthly Ask an Eagle live stream where you'll get into a Zoom chat room with us, and we'll have a former Eagles coach or player or personnel executive on, and our great Patreon members will get to ask them questions and have them answered. That would be tier 2 for $12, tier 3 for $15. We've been saying is all of that what you get in tier 1, tier 2, Ask an Eagle live stream show, the uploaded pods immediately with no ads, and also a weekly during the Eagle season Ask Greg Cosell live stream where our great Patreon members will get to interact directly with Greg Cosell on a show and ask him questions. So that's the $15 tier. And then plus anything that develops along the way, we're just going to throw it into tier 3. That's $15 a month. And anybody can save, whether tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, 15% if they sign up for a year-long and annual membership. So that is our great Patreon community we've been telling you about, patreon.com/insidethebirds. Okay, Andrew, let's before we get into like individual offenses, offensive players, conceptually, we saw a lot of people saw at the open practice what reporters have been seeing for a little bit, which is you saw some motion in the offense, definitely saw some bunch formations, some stack formations, as the offense trips formations. Yeah, the offense moved down pretty well, and some of that is no tackling. There was one run, I think, a Gainwell up the middle, just delayed. It was like no one's going to touch him. So you can't put too much into that, but yeah, you got to see what I call formational diversity there. And is that what you've been seeing a lot of in camp?
Absolutely. That's been one of my most pertinent takeaways from watching that offense. There's a lot of eye candy going on, putting different guys in positions to be successful. I think Devontae Smith's going to have a monster year. I really do. Just given Moore's affinity to move receivers around, I think that's going to open up opportunities for Devontae to really take advantage of secondaries. And Kenny Gainwell has been sort of a revelation. I maintain that. I mean, I don't know if you share the same beliefs, Jeff, but I think he's the most naturally gifted pass catching running back that the Eagles have, and he showed as much during training camp. Just a very natural, fluid pass catcher, and I think he's going to have a role as well. They've been making a conscious effort of getting him the ball in the passing game, so I think that was something that I also took away going into training camp. I wasn't really sure if he was going to be sort of written off and they're going to give way to Saquon exclusively, or what was going to be in the cards for Kenny, but he impressed me as well.
Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, was the touchdown that Hurts threw to Goddard at the Linc practice where he rolled to his left and hit him. There was an orbit motion going on before that, which is I think that was it Gainwell? I couldn't tell the number.
I think if memory serves, it was.
Yeah, and yes, I think Gainwell came to the Eagles with that kind of resume in Memphis. We've had Ryan Silverfield on with us, the Memphis head coach, on Inside the Birds, and he too thought that there would be opportunities to catch the ball, to line up like a receiver, to give maybe in an offense like Kellen Moore's now, even more so, to give the defense some eye candy, but it's never materialized. And I thought last year was a tough year for him catching the ball. And that might have been the way the ball was thrown to him. Who knows? But there were a couple. I just think in general, he hasn't caught the ball nearly as much as we thought. But if you go back and look at how DeAndre Swift had a career low receiving yards and catches last year, it may be more how the offense has functioned and less how the running backs functions or the running back's ability to catch the ball.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So maybe this offense will unlock that, and maybe Kenny Gainwell. You said he lost weight, right?
He said he's been playing at 200,
exposure?
and he really focused on becoming more explosive in the offseason. And he looks it. He's not going to be the home run hitter that a Saquon Barkley is going to be, or a Will Shipley, right? But I think he offers some good burst and acceleration. He's good when he gets the ball in his hands. He gets upfield, and he's very sure-handed and a good route runner. Well, he was a former wide receiver at Memphis. So I think he's going to have a role. But going into training camp, I wasn't really sure that he was. But he's done some good things. And then you mentioned Dallas Goedert on that touchdown. Dallas Goedert he was the star that day. I think you're going to see a lot of tight end usage, very heavy tight end usage this year under Kellen Moore. Just look at his experience with Dalton Schultz. I thought he really did a nice job unlocking Dalton Schultz. And I think you're going to see a lot of 12 personnel in the passing game, which is why it's notable that Grant Calcaterra has leapfrogged the veteran CJ Uzomah in the tight end pecking order.
That would be interesting because he's always been more of a spread guy, more of an 11 personnel guy. But I don't know that he's had a Goddard. He had a Schultz, right? But did he have two guys who could really catch the ball or stretch a field vertically? Would he consider Calcaterra more like a flex? He would consider Calcaterra a flex tight end. So if he's out there in 12 personnel, is that sort of 12 personnel disguised as 11 personnel disguised as 12 personnel?
Yes, and you even heard Nick Sirianni allude to it. A number three receiver could be, and he mentioned Grant Calcaterra's name first. It's back in the spring, and
Hmm.
they're probably going to get creative with what they qualify as a third receiver. Saquon Barkley may fulfill that role at some point as well. But I think that they do have plans for Grant, and I think it's really interesting to see it materialize throughout camp because he hasn't faded away like past couple summers. I think he's been really consistent, and he really
Hmm.
seems to have gained the quarterback's trust, which is something that was a pretty big takeaway for me through 7 practices that I got to see.
So back to your point on Gainwell, he sort of is exactly what we were conversing about at the start of this podcast, where you see a guy, yeah, he's in better shape, he's ready for this, and you see him have good training camps, and then you get into the season, like you remember last year, how much did DeAndre Swift catch the ball in training camp last year? A ton. I
Yep,
mean,
and he
you would
had
have
39 catches last year.
right, like, you would have bet your life that DeAndre Swift was gonna be and the whole p throwing to the running back was gonna be a much bigger part of the offense. So, while I'm encouraged by what you've been writing and we've been observing and hearing about Kenny Gainwell, I'm sort of in the camp, well, I gotta actually see if this materializes during the season or really before I believe that that's going to happen.
Right.
But
That,
I
that,
do like
that,
what
that,
I've heard about Will Shipley, so
yeah, but that doesn't take away from what Kenny's done on the field. It's just a matter of if that's going to be a something that the quarterback opts to do, throw to the running back.
correct.
I see what I see. I believe from what I've seen from Gainwell.
Mhm. So, yeah, 100%. I think the quarterback and the running back in this offense
Yeah,
especially have to be in much better sync in the passing game than it was previously. So let's talk quarterback real quick. Jalen Hurts, uh, we've talked I actually wanted to talk a little bit about Tanner McKee here. We'll get back to
sure.
Hurts in a
Yeah,
second, but I suspected that McKee was going to, around now, start to move up, not move up, but maybe get some second team snaps because he's not just a camp body. He's a guy that impressed the team last year. And the biggest struggle for a third string quarterback, especially a young one like him, is that there are so few reps in a training camp practice, right? Especially last year and the year before when practice was like 45, 55 minutes. At least now they're a little longer. They do that developmental period after that reporters don't really get to observe, but there's so few reps that it only makes sense if you really believe that this guy can eventually be a number two or has some talent that should be developed and seen, that you got to at least get him. It doesn't mean Kenny Pickett is doing anything wrong. You're just
right.
trying to give this guy a little bit more.
Yeah, and have him work with a stronger supporting cast and
Right.
really grow as a player because he is going to be a part of the Eagles' long-term future. Kenny Pickett, maybe not so much, but I thought that today McKee did well to acquitted himself well directing the offense. There was a couple passes I'm sure he'd like to have back, but he didn't really put the ball in harm's way. He seems to has a lot more touch. He seems to be in command and developing within the offense. He has his best throw of the day, I think, was to the left sideline, right where I was, right with CJ Gardner Johnson in coverage and behind Isaiah Rodgers to Jacob Harris. And that really showed his ability to kind of get off his read, his first read and throw the ball with some touch right in the bucket there. So I thought that was a good sign of development.
Yeah, interesting kid. I'm really sort of fascinated to see him when the preseason. That's where we first really saw him shine, was the preseason games, because he just didn't get reps in practice last year. He's a rookie. He's I think a 6th round pick, right? You don't know
Yeah.
much about him, and bam, all of a sudden, I remember in that last preseason game they had signed that receiver. What was his name? Johnny
Johnny
King.
King. Johnny King.
Johnny
Yeah.
King, and this guy was just letting it. First, it was Tyree Cleveland, then it was Johnny King. I mean, McKee was letting it fly. He didn't care. So I thought that was a really good sign. A very confident thrower with a really good arm.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he showed today. It seemed like he was taking advantage of his opportunities, and I'm curious to see if that sort of bleeds into the next few practices where you're going to see him sort of eat into those second team reps.
Tell me what you're seeing from Hertz in the 11 on 11s. We know that He has not thrown an interception. We know that he is really doing a great job of spreading the ball, getting it to AJ, getting it to Devontae. Dallas Goedert having all those touchdowns in the open practice is a really good sign. Those two were not on the same page early last year. But you also said you observed there were times where you feel like, I always say in these camps, like there's no reason to hold on to the ball. You're not going
Right.
to get hit. Like if you're holding on to the ball, it's because you know you're not going to get hit, and that's detrimental to you. You have to play the game as a quarterback the way you expect to play it during the regular season. Is he?
Yeah,
Do you feel like he's still sort of dodging pressure or perceived pressure?
the one drawback I would say is that he is holding on to the ball in a drill that's really skewed heavily towards the offense, right? 7-on-7, you shouldn't be holding the ball. You know exactly where it should go. 11-on-11, I think in some cases he would be sacked in a game. But by and large, the ball hasn't touched the ground, sans a couple of drops. He seems to be in full command of the offense. He's seeing the field well. Looks like he's becoming a full field reader. He's developing that part of his game, taking that making that evolution as a quarterback that he needs to. And it just seems like the entire menu's at his disposal. Now, this is just training camp, so context is very important here. We have to see how that materializes in game situations. But from what I've seen right now, you're seeing a much more advanced quarterback than last season, and he seems to be playing with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, you wonder if that new offense too, that fresh concept has helped him. Just it gives the defense a different look. Plus, I think you always get excited when you're trying something new. Yes, it's tough to learn, but this offense has always been quarterback friendly. And so there's got to be certain routes and route designs that are pretty favorable for him wanting to get rid of the ball quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also would say that in the spring, a lot was made about his uneven practices. But he was also learning a new offense. That was the installation period. I think that he deserves some credit for being able to take all that information that he was learning over those next 6-7 weeks and really absorb himself in the playbook, because he was hitting the ground running when training camp started. I think that speaks to his football acumen and his ability to be adaptable, learning under all these different offensive coordinators over the past 8 years. And so it's not really much of a surprise. Now you just have to see if there's going to be that carryover and in moving forward into the regular season.
All right, let's transition back to the receiver, because we talked about Calcaterra almost as a flex number 3 wide receiver in the absence of a true slot. And I have some concerns. Even when I hear about players playing well, we've seen Johnny Wilson take a decent amount of first team reps. Okay, now Paris Campbell has got a groin injury that could really threaten his spot or his hold. I mean, I don't even think they were already looking at Johnny Wilson and
Yeah.
Britton Covey and some others. So I don't think Paris
John
Campbell
Moss.
was the etched in stone number 3 guy as some may have thought going in after like 2 or 3 days of practices. Covey has caught your attention though.
I'll tell you what, Jeff, as a route runner, it's just precision, his footwork. He's very quick. He's in and out of breaks. He's very sudden in and out of his breaks. And I think with him, he doesn't really get the opportunity to showcase what he can do as a pass catcher, because he's been a punt returner and an effective one. But he's also someone who last summer he never got that opportunity because he had the hamstring injury. But of that group, there's not a single player that separates better than Britton Covey. I don't know what that means. I don't know how he fits into the equation, but he's been a matchup nightmare for a lot of these guys just because of his footwork and his ability to separate and that short area quickness that we talk about so often. It's going to be really interesting to see what he's able to do in the preseason, because we've never really seen him have a large sample size as a pass catcher, and certainly not in an offense like this.
Right. So this is the concern that I have, because I think that's encouraging for Britton Covey, right? And Johnny Wilson is a 6'7" guy, rookie, who you can see in the slot, if he can catch the ball, you can see where his body type would really be advantageous, especially when you want to run out of 11 personnel, which again, this is going to be an 11 personnel dominant offense. Even if there's 2 tight ends out there, it's going to be more 11 personnel looking than you might think of a normal 12 personnel. It's seemingly opening the door for situational slot receiver, which is okay. You're making the most of your weapons. If we're going to run the ball, we might get, our 6'7" guy in there. If we want to stretch a defense vertically, we might get our, what's Covey? 5'10", 5'11"?
5'8". He's 5'8".
5'8". I was being generous. all right, we might get Britton Covey in there, or if Anaya Smith can start being consistent, we can get him in there a little more. Uh, when you become situational in the slot, though, you become telegraphic, right? Oh,
Sure.
the big guys in the slot got to look for the run here. Oh, the little guys in the slot probably going to pass. So every coach wants a slot receiver, much like anybody else on the field. They want to be able to run an offense. This is why you want a 3-down running back, right? You don't want a running back for first and second down, and then one who's your quote unquote third down back. You can make it work. In 2017, the Eagles did, but what's the first thing they did in 2018? They draft Miles Sanders, right? Because
Sure.
it's a conventional West Coast offense. They don't want giveaways, and so it does feel like with what they've got here in the slot. Okay, you're auditioning different people and you're starting to see maybe different roles, but now are you being telegraphic?
Now, if you're to take what Nick Sirianni said at face value on Thursday night before practice, he said just that he wasn't averse to a committee approach in terms of we'll play the matchups depending on skill sets, etc. I don't know if that's going to work because, like you said, it becomes telegraphic. But you do have an interesting group of 4 players there. They all offer something different. I don't know what that means. I don't know if they're going to be viable options come September, but it's something to keep an eye on. I mean, I think ultimately that number 3 receiver that we're talking about probably isn't on the roster. And if I had to pick right now, I'm going to say it's Johnny Wilson as your number 3 receiver when the Eagles play in Brazil on week 1. But he's a rookie. But I would say from everything that I've seen, he looks the most legitimate and able to step right in and give you a different dimension. And he can also help you as a blocker, which, as we've seen with guys like Zach Pascal in the past, those type of players really help your offense in different ways. Maybe not even on the stat sheet, but they can be highly effective in different ways.
So, okay, but I'm more interested in your observation on this week 1 season opener, which, by the way, I mean, a month and just a few days away now. By
Yeah.
the first preseason game, it'll be a month, right? Johnny Wilson is your starting slot receiver as you observe it right now. Is Johnny Wilson in the slot 100% of the slot reps, or
I don't
is
think
this
so.
rotational?
I think it's going to be rotational because then when you look at it even deeper, Jeff, who are your backups on the outside? It's not going to be Britton Covey.
No,
It's not going to be John Ross. John Ross probably isn't even going to make the team.
right.
Paris Campbell, I don't know. Paris Campbell has to, he's got to prove that he can stay healthy, and he's not a lock either.
Mm-hmm.
So Johnny Wilson gives you inside and outside versatility. He's your backup X. So I don't know that he will be a full-time slot, but I think given everybody healthy and everything at their disposal, he probably would be come week 1.
They're really getting hurt right now by Anaya Smith just not having a great camp and dropping,
Yeah,
because he can play. He's obviously a slot receiver with his build. But he's strong. He's not a thin slot. He can, when Britton Covey gets the ball or is in the slot, you worry, like, can he survive like 7 snaps in a row there?
sure.
Especially if they run the ball 3 or 4 times. Less so with Anaya Smith, but he just hasn't had a great camp so far. But that's the issue: is he's got to make the team. He's a 5th-round pick. Not going to cut him. So he
Right.
takes up a spot, but might be inactive, right? Just like
Well, that's the
Ringo
way
last year.
that's trending right now because
Yes.
there are 6 guys, if you're looking at it strictly off of practice, that are ahead of him right now. He doesn't have an awful lot of opportunities, but I think that's also telling, right? You're not getting a ton of reps. There are guys. I mean, I've even noticed Jacob Harris more than I've noticed Anaya Smith. That's not to say that Anaya won't, have a really, really effective preseason and change everybody's opinion and rewrite his script there. But he's going to have to make the team. I mean, do you view him as a lock?
Anaya Smith,
Yeah.
100%. I don't think Howie's cutting his own draft picks, his rookies.
I
don't
guess
think
if
it's
they kept
happening.
Shelton Gibson after that summer, Shelton Gibson had a rough camp.
Yeah, he did.
And he was
That's
also
funny.
he was also a 5th-round pick. So yeah, I am with you there.
Didn't Shelton Gibson make one of the most important plays in a playoff game, though, where he drew a pass interference on somebody?
Yeah, I think Josh McCown threw it to him. Josh McCown on a torn hamstring threw a deep pass to Shelton
That's
Gibson
right. Oh God, amazing! Is that against Seattle?
against Seattle.
Unbelievable. Who would have thought
And
Shelton
Shelton
Gibson?
Gibson had just been signed off like a practice squad somewhere.
I remember that. Unbelievable. Tell me about EJ Jenkins. You've written about him. You wrote about
Yeah.
him going into camp.
Well,
If
today was the first day that he's caught my eye sporadically, Jeff, as far as just being able to pluck the ball out of the air. He's got really strong hands. He's explosive after the catch, but he hasn't been active as much during team drills. Today, I noticed him on consecutive plays from Tanner McKee getting the ball out of his hands quickly and letting EJ make some plays on the move. I think when you look at that third tight end spot, CJ Uzama has not done a lot to instill any sort of confidence. He's a little bit older. He's had some knee injuries. He doesn't move particularly well. He's had some drops. Yeah, I know he's a good blocker, but I think if you're looking for upside, then it becomes Alberto Quabenam. Maybe Alberto hasn't done a whole lot this summer either. EJ Jenkins is a guy who I think we spent some time on the Eagles practice squad, but when you look at somebody who's 6'6", 260, and has that type of wingspan and radius, and he kind of reminds me of the new version of Tyree Jackson. And I don't think the Eagles want to risk losing him, but we'll have to see how he blocks in the preseason, and if he can show he can be a complete player, is going to go a long way in his roster prospects.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, when you write up on either Thursday or Friday your things to watch for the Eagles' first preseason game, and EJ Jenkins, if he happens to appear in the story, it's he could catch 0 balls for 0 yards to me. Wouldn't matter, right? It's, do they run the ball at all? Well, I'm sure they will. When he's in there, probably, pretty early, right? They're not going to play first stringer, so he'll
No.
probably get in there by the second quarter. You have to watch how he's performing when they run the ball, and how he's performing in the passing game too, if he's kept in to block. But that, you just nailed it. CJ Uzama is their best blocking option from 2 through whatever, 2 through 3,
Yep.
4, 5, right? But he's not giving you anything right now. Didn't have a very good year last year. You don't know what he's got left. They're probably starving for, and Grant Calcaterra too. If he can block as well, that's a feather in the cap. He was starting to get decent at it before last year. Last year was a step back.
He's
Yeah.
okay. He's okay.
I don't think he's ever really going to be someone who you can say, wow, that was a good block. You'll always say, all right, that was adequate. He held his own there, right? But if EJ Jenkins, what's EJ's size again?
6'6", 260. He's just
Yeah.
shy of 6'7".
Yeah. So he's got some body to him. The same thing like we're talking about Johnny Wilson. If this guy, you look at and say, you know what, that's a good block right there. He's getting the block. And I know you wrote about it. He's worked with offensive line, right, people on this part of the game. Then I think he'll have a pretty good shot. I know Uzama's got some guaranteed money, so this is going to have to be like the uppercut of the century, but it could happen. It could.
If he flashes in the preseason or puts out any good tape, being 25 years old, having that body type, it might be tough to hide somebody like that. Sometimes you want to swing for upside at that third tight end spot versus a veteran that in CJ Uzama, you could probably cut him and put him on your practice squad and elevate him if need be. Something to consider in terms of strategy.
Right. Well, let's finish off the offense just with some offensive line observations. So here's how it was put to me on Becton, that he's, obviously playing right guard when he can here, and he's learning the position, that he's doing all right. He has some up moments, he has some down moments. I know it's very tough as reporters to judge offensive linemen, especially when pads have only been out twice, and then in one of them, you guys are up in the link. It's, you don't get to see what's going on in the trenches real well. I feel like this one's far from decided, but the more times Tyler Steen misses, the more you give Becton a chance to learn it, get better at it, or the more Howie Roseman thinks he may have to make a move here.
See, I've always said this. If your goal was to get your best 5 on the field, your most talented 5, I would have to think that would include Mekhi Becton. Given the size, the power, the athleticism, if he's able to show that he can even be adequate at that position, having a right wall of Lane Johnson and Mekhi Becton and a left wall of Jordan Mailata and Landon Dickerson should make you feel a lot better about that protection up front, especially losing Jason Kelce. Look, he has a long way to go. You outlined that well. We have to see how he does in game situations, but I think so far what I've seen is a player who doesn't look like he's swimming, and I've seen more. I don't know if it's fair to say I've seen more from him than I have from Steen, because we haven't really seen a lot from Steen. We just don't know.
Right.
But I think Becton does not look like a fish out of water.
Well, that's a good sign. Good sign for him. And we'll see. I'm very curious to see if Steen misses more time. I know they're trying to get Becton like conditioned to see if he can start, but they have other guys who can play this spot too. You mentioned Hennessy. Darian Kennard is a guy from the Chiefs who practiced last year at guard or played guard on their practice squad, and they thought he was a better guard than a tackle. Gates,
Sharping,
Sharping, yeah. I mean, there are some guys with some experience here, NFL playoff experience.
Nick Gates.
Yeah, Nick Gates especially, right? Who are not getting that turn. So we'll see. Again, this is you always see the movement after the first preseason game. We'll see how that goes, and then later this week in practice. Let us move over to defense and get our defensive observations in. First, we're going to pause real quick to hear a word from our friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
And if you happen to stop into Sky Motor Cars out there in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam and Jeff sent you. You will get a great deal. If you can't go in, visit them at SkyMotorCars.com. So, Andrew, one of the things that excited me watching some of the it wasn't all 22, but some video in which I was able to see all 22 of the practice was I was like, oh, all right. Vic did a sim pressure here, which is he was blitzing a linebacker, dropping an overhang player, right? There was a 5-man pressure, so he blitzed a little bit too. I mean, nothing crazy. He's Vic Fangio, right? He's not going to blitz. We know he's not blitzing at much of a high percentage above 20 to 24%, but he will conjure things. He will make the quarterback think. And you saw that. I saw that at least on that drive where Goddard caught the touchdown in the left corner of the end zone.
Yeah, it looked to be a tough outing for the defense. I would say the offense had their way, but that was really how I think the practice was skewed. I've been really fixated on that second level. Who's blitzing? I've seen Devin White. I've seen Nakobe Dean. I've seen Zach Bond blitz. Van Sumeren's blitz, Trotter's blitz. They've all had taken turns. And you mentioned the sim pressure, which is really interesting. You wrote a story about that on InsideTheBirds.com. That's something I think is going to be I don't want to say a hallmark, but it's going to be something that is a reoccurring element to his defense. And it was something that I've seen consistently throughout the summer. Now, I'm not sure where the linebacker situation is right now because it's really interesting. You've seen Zach Bond and Devin White. They've been the starters. Nakobe Dean has worked in with the ones, but he's primarily been working with the second team. Today, Jeremiah Trotter was got some first team reps. So that to me is a position I've been really fixated on throughout the summer.
Yeah. The sim pressures are great. And I think that they make the quarterback think, but there's a definite exchange rate, right? Like your American dollar may be worth less money somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
When you sim pressure, you're blitzing a linebacker. It could be Nakobe Dean, could be Devin White, but you're dropping one of your
Edge
four
player, yeah.
rushers, right? Usually an edge player, right? So to me, it's sort of like a bad poison, right? Josh Sweat is not the type of guy you want dropping. He's never been a 3-4 outside linebacker. He has adjusted to play the overhang spot, but you want him at the quarterback and not dropping. He doesn't have that pedigree and those instincts. So if you're always rushing him and dropping the other guy, well, the other guy's Bryce Huff. And I don't think you paid him all that money to no, don't. So you didn't run that. And then you're like, well, you could theoretically drop an inside rusher, but like, what are you gonna drop Jalen Carter into cover? No, I mean, it's going to be a
disaster.
It's going to be a rotation of players, and really the guy who's best suited to do it is Nolan Smith, either rush or drop, and it might signify that when what gets real, when shit gets real, that Nolan Smith might see more time as an overhang player than Sweat, especially if Sweat is just not looking like the old, the Josh Sweat of a year and a half ago. But for now, I'm just saying, like, these pressures are great conceptually and they can help you, but Vic is definitely going to have to pay a price somewhere along the line for who he's dropping when he does those.
Yeah, absolutely. That could certainly hurt you if you rely on that too much. But I think it's an interesting wrinkle because you have every linebacker the Eagles have right now has a blitzing in their skill set. I think that's an element that they bring to the table. And that's also something that when you see it manifest on the field, you're like, oh, Zach Bond was an edge rusher. This is all coming into, this makes a lot of sense, especially if you intend to utilize him in that way. But I mean, they have a long ways to go. And like you said, that there is an exchange there. You could pay the price in a very inopportune situation if you rely too heavily on it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the front seven here. Let's talk about Milton Williams. He is a guy whose name, it's not like you've written a lot about him. I haven't seen a whole lot. I don't think he's doing anything wrong. I'm just saying it's not like it's the Milton Williams show every day. But conversely, Moro Ajomo, a second-year guy you've written about, Adam and I have heard a lot about as far as his development and what he's bringing. He's being very disruptive, to
Yeah.
what he hear. He's really starting to put it together. So to me, we already know Moro Ajomo is going to see more time this year than last year. Is he going to knock Milton Williams out of that starting team? Probably not.
No,
But
no.
and is he going to be on the first team pass rush when you have a four-man rush? Well, you got Jalen Carter, Bryce Huff, Nolan Smith, Josh Sweat. Like, it's going to be tough. You're right. I mean, Milton Williams himself has good pass rush. So, but he might be on the second string of each, right? He's going to get more time.
He has to. The depth at that defensive tackle spot is so critical this year. But I think you're seeing a big leap from Moro Ojomo. You're seeing the violent hands. You're seeing the explosive traits. He's extremely disruptive. He was in the backfield an awful lot today. I just think that he's playing a lot more physically and aggressively, which has lent itself to flashing a lot more. You're noticing him. He keeps jumping out. And I've mentioned this in many articles on InsideTheBirds.com that I believe that he was one of those players that I felt was going to make that sophomore leap. Given you have to take into account the opportunity, there's certainly snaps for him to do so. But I like the player a lot coming out of Texas. If you remember, me and Greg Cosell were really high on him. Like his long arms, his positional versatility, and his skill set. And I think with a year under his belt, yeah, he didn't play a lot. He played just 68 snaps last year. I think that's going to serve him well moving forward. And you're starting to see that now.
That could be a really nice find. I mean, again, this is training camp, but this is a guy who did get some opportunities in the Matt Patricia defense at the end of last year as a second string, as a little situational pass rusher. So it's good that he's putting it together. I mean, this is the first time in a long time we can say the Eagles don't have a ton of depth on the interior defensive line. But if that's your number 4 guy and he's playing at a good enough level that you want to get him in there, that always speaks well. That's good.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to keep watching him to see if he's able to sustain that level of play. But right now, I think the Eagles should be pretty encouraged with one of their young defensive linemen taking a big leap.
Jordan Davis. We haven't talked a lot about him on the pod. Obviously, the big thing with him is conditioning, strength. Being able to hold up, play multiple reps. Is he lost the weight? How is the conditioning element going?
To me, to the eye test, it seems like it's going better. But it's never been about August and September and October. It's been about later in the season. So we won't really be able to gauge much of anything until the second half of the season. But what I will say right now is you're seeing somebody who he's flowing to the football a lot more. Like he's pursuing the football. He's generated a lot of pressure, maybe not getting home, but he's flushing quarterbacks out of the pocket and he's in pursuit. So I think that really speaks to his conditioning. And I do think he's going to be in position to have a big year. And this is no doubt about it, Jeff. It's a really big year for him. He has to perform. But both Jordan and Jalen Carter have both spoke on the fact that they know that they're going to have a lot more responsibility this year. They know Fletcher Cox isn't there. So I think knowing that and having that knowledge and understanding, you approach the offseason a little bit differently and you realize it's getting real. We have to step up and we have to be the face of the defense. And so far, it looks like he's answering the bell.
See, yeah, Wednesday's practice would be a practice where I'd be zeroed in on Jordan Davis. Why? Because it'll be the 4th practice in a row, right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They're going 90 minutes now. It's been absurdly hot, although I think it's supposed to cool off a little bit during the middle of the week. But when you're going that hard for 4 straight days, that's when you'll get to see it. Is he as explosive? I mean, again, they're not going to hit the quarterback. They're not going to tackle to the ground, but you'll just get to see him at practice. Is he running on and off the field with the same way that he was, after they didn't practice for 3 out of 4 days? That'll be a really good day to test him out. All right, so we'll move to the inside linebacker here. Well, I'll give you what I was told. You tell me what you saw. All
Sure.
right. And I think this is the hardest part for people watching a practice, especially the fans at the Link 50,000. Man, it was amazing to see. But, Devin White is someone who has taken probably the most first team reps and has the most experience. But as I've been told, has been up and down. And there are some times where he's just not looked the way you want Devin White to look.
Like a tick too slow, is that what you mean? Because there's certain
Yeah.
times in coverage where he's in the vicinity, but it seems like he's not reacting as quick as, as the play is intended, just a tick slow. And instead of being able to make a play on the football, he's having to, quickly tag up on and he's allowing the catch. But
Hmm.
you see the athleticism, and you just like to see a lot more consistency, right? Because in the springtime, when you're seeing a linebacker run with Saquon Barkley and carry him up the sideline on a wheel route, I mean, that speaks to his athleticism. That's never been the question, but it's been about consistency and playing to the level and playing within the confines of a defense.
Hmm. All right. Well, we'll see. I think you're right that if he's a tick slow, it's not because of athleticism. It's because comfort or not knowing what he's supposed to be doing, which has sort of been the book on him for the last year or two, is that he's sort of, n- from a responsibility standpoint, not always doing what he's supposed to do. So that's something to keep an eye on. Zach Bourne, you've mentioned his name a lot. He's almost been like the star of camp without actually doing anything yet. I think and I'm not saying he's not done well. He's clearly performed well. Here's how it was put to me that he is performing well for somebody who has never played the position before. So that's like a good thing. But if you're going to compare him to your standard league NFL average inside linebacker, and you were doing a rep by rep comparison, you might say, well, he's not there yet.
That's fair. I would say out of all the linebackers, I felt that he's been the most consistent. The big plays have eluded him, but I think down to down, he's never seems to be out of place. It seems like he's very dialed in to what Vic Fangio is looking to do. Now, again, we have to see how he's able to shed blocks and do all these things when the games when it's live game situation. But I think right now they have to be really encouraged with where he is, having not played that position much. He's a highly intelligent player, and right now not having he's been the first team linebacker throughout the entire summer. He's never shown anything or had a drop off where I was okay, N'Kobe's going to be out there today. So I think when you see that level of consistency, there's trust there, and also knowing that he seems like a player that Vic Fangio sought out in particular for his skill set. So there's
Hmm.
something there that they believe they can really tap into, and he's going to help him, execute his vision. So one of the more interesting players on that defense.
Are you starting to believe he's going to be the starting linebacker, one of the
I,
two starting linebackers?
I'm starting to. You know that I've been, on the Kobe Dean train, and that I believe that once the dust settled and this experiment, subsided, I thought N'Kobe was going to be able to do enough. But I have to tell you, N'Kobe's been a lot better going downhill, getting after the quarterback, charging on running backs, shooting the gaps. But when you're putting him in space, he's again a tick slow. It just seems like
Hmm.
he's not being able to match up with some of these running backs. Kenny Gainwell has given him a ton of fits over the past couple practices, and it hasn't been exclusive to just Kenny. So that's an area where you're gonna have to be able to cover. You gotta be more than just a one dimensional player. And I think compared to Bond, N'Kobe hasn't really shown as much in coverage.
But this translates really nicely into the next guy we're going to talk about. Probably the guy who we were told is really on the come up so far, and that's Jeremiah Trotter Jr. from Clemson. And I think it's a really interesting contrast because athletically, as far as speed and measurables and size and all that, he don't compare to what Devin White brings, to what N'Kobe Dean can bring, and what even Zach Bond, right? But this guy was born to be an inside linebacker, and he understand his football IQ and understanding the position allows him to compensate for what he doesn't do well athletically. And unlike N'Kobe Dean, who was, like you said, a blitzer a lot in college, right? Not always great at coverage. Unlike Zach Bond, who's never played inside linebacker full time. Unlike Devin White, who also was used a lot more as a blitzer, especially recently, than a guy who can cover or be excellent against the run. Trotter Jr. should have all of that. I mean, he knows how to play the run. He knows how to get downhill. Probably knows how to cover pretty good because he's asked to do it quite a bit in college. He wasn't blitzing every other down like Nakobe. I mean, I didn't study the Clemson defense. This is just the intel I got, but he may have the most natural inside linebacker instincts among all of them.
That's fair, absolutely fair. And the IQ really stands out. So when you don't have the measure, if you don't have the speed, well, you have to have something to hang your hat on. And for him, it's very apparent that his instincts are advanced, and he's seeing and processing things at a higher frequency than some of these other players that you've mentioned. Shooting the gaps. There's been back-to-back practices where he got through with what would have been a sack. He's tagging, he's playing very physical. It was no surprise that Zach Bond mentioned, I don't think it was any accident that Zach Bond, when I asked him to assess the linebacker room, he said it's a great room, everybody can play ball. And then at the end, he was just like, and Jeremiah Trotter's done a really good job picking up this defense. And he has really a lot of attributes that are pretty favorable. And I'm like, oh, that's the only player he name dropped. He must really be doing some good things on the practice field and in the film room that maybe we're not privy to. So I've been starting to keep an eye on him, and you're seeing him get more opportunities, because when camp started, he was getting some first team reps sporadically. Then for a while, he's working with the third team. Now today, you saw him get a lot of first team reps. So I have to think that Vic's not necessarily enthused with what he's seen from his linebackers. I don't know that, but based on the rotation, if you're still rotating guys and you're leading up to your first preseason game, you're trying to gauge where your personnel is and how you can best execute it, your vision. So I thought it was interesting.
Andrew, it feels like the conversations we were having at safety last year. Well, Justin Evans is going to play safety. He's really only been mostly a nickel in his career, like that. Like we're talking about Zach Bourne. He's really been an outside linebacker in his career. Terrell Edmonds, hey, he's a veteran. Well, yeah, but he was given up on. I mean, that feels like the Devin White, former first-round pick, who was given up on, right? And then you got the young kid and Reed Blankenship. You have a young kid here and Nakobe Dean trying to, on the come. It just feels like the same situation. And I agree. Especially from the intel that we've been getting, it feels like inside linebacker once again is a defensive coordinator's, keeping him up at night for the wrong reasons.
So
And
you and I have not talked about this, Geoff. How do you envision the linebacker situation playing out?
yeah, so I was just about to get into, I feel like if Jeremiah Trotter Jr. really continues to show growth and progression, that our concept of starting linebacker goes out the window. What I think it'll be like the way we discuss situational slot receiver. I think you're going to have your rundown linebackers. I think you're going to have your pass coverage linebackers, your blitz and sim pressure linebackers, and it's probably going to be a rotation of different guys in different roles that include Nakobe, Zach Bond, Devin White, and Jeremiah Trotter. That's how I would think the way it feels like it's going, which would be smart if that's where the job of a coach is to put a player in the position to succeed and to try to maximize the skill set. So why to try to put a couple guys out there who you think are really bad at pass coverage just because their names are this or their pedigrees are that? If you have somebody better, but he's not your best linebacker, okay, well then put him in the spot where his attributes best fit. And luckily on defense, unlike offense where your slot receiver, you can be telegraphic. Your defense, you're responding to what the offense is doing. It's okay if you have different rotations for different strengths, and it feels like it's going that route right now.
That's the way I see it trending too. Look, you're not going to make any significant upgrades at this point in the offseason or this part in the summer. I think the Eagles, I highly doubt they would trade for a linebacker. I think this is the lineup that they're working with. And they all bring something different to the table. So much like you said, with the number 3 receiver spot, I could see them mixing and matching personnel, much like what I've seen all throughout the summer, to best accentuate what each player does.
Absolutely. Look, I think the preseason game is going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see the alignments there and who plays and who doesn't play. All right, let's finish this off with the secondary. I mean, I want to get into the Quinyon Mitchell's usage. I'm very fascinated by it. I mean, if you would have told me going into camp that after, I don't know how many, 8 practices, which is, almost 2 weeks of practice, that Quinyon Mitchell was going to be performing pretty well and yet still not see first team outside corner reps, mostly starting to play first team nickel reps, I would have been like, wow, this guy was born to be an outside corner. He's tall, he's long, he's fast. He was dominant in college. and you're now putting him on the inside because you're trying to like figure it out between Ringo and Isaiah Rodgers. That's almost like mind blowing to me. But look, first of all, we're early in camp, and second, I think it's a really good asset if they think that he can play nickelback, and that's where they want him, and they're comfortable with a Ringo or a Rodgers opposite Darius Slay.
Yeah, I think they're trying to broaden his skill set and trying him out at nickel and dime packages and on the outside is really going to ultimately help him. You know, in a game situation, you may have to lean on him. And if you're also if you're looking to get your first round pick on the field, the clearest path right now would probably be nickel, where under ordinary circumstances, Cooper DeJean is probably your week one nickel. But now he has that setback with the hamstring. Well, the learning curve is going to be pretty steep to get up to speed. So then you have to wonder where that puts him. But I think if Quinion has acquitted himself very well at the nickel role.
Mhm.
Isaiah and Keeley have been, shuffling back and forth with the first team, and neither one seems to have seized that spot. But if you're asking me right now, I'm going to tell you that I think Isaiah Rodgers would be the week one starter at corner, simply because I think he just makes more plays on the football. I think he always his closing speed, his recovery speed, his instincts, his eye discipline. He gets his hands on a lot of football. So you'd like to see him be able to convert some of those into interceptions, but I think he's had a more consistent training camp than has Keely Ringo.
Right, right. So this goes back to the conversation we were sort of just having about receiver and linebacker, and it's about getting your best players on the field so that you can have the best overall team. If Quinyon Mitchell starts outside opposite Darius Slay, you need a nickel back. That's not Keely Ringo. He's not built or made to be a
No.
nickel. Isaiah Rodgers I don't think I think we've discussed this. People have called him a nickelback because he's short and he played in nickel in Indianapolis, but he was
Very
the
sparingly.
outside, but he
Yeah.
played outside nickel.
Yeah.
They moved who's the guy they moved inside?
Kenny Moore.
Kenny Moore, right? So he doesn't have a ton of nickel back experience either. So if you're going to play Quinyon Mitchell opposite Darius Slay, then you're going back to the well with either Avante Maddox or Tyler Hall. Good players, and Avante's big thing is that he's hurt more. But and maybe this was part of the thinking, if I can get a Rodgers or a Ringo on the field at outside corner opposite Slay and Mitchell as my nickel, I get more talent on the field and I'm faster and I'm more dynamic. Mitchell ran a what 4.44, right? 4.4 at the
Yeah.
combine. Rodgers is what 4.29, 4.3, something like that.
Rodgers can fly.
Yeah, Rodgers can fly. I mean, the only one of your corners who doesn't fly at that point is Slay, but he's a smart, intelligent corner, and he's still pretty good, right? So to me, and again, I'm sort of spitballing here, and we'll look more into it. Maybe the thought process is if we get Quinyon Mitchell in at nickel, it allows us to get a more dynamic outside corner as opposed to putting Mitchell outside, him doing great there, but then we're less dynamic, far less dynamic at nickel, and that makes us far less dynamic overall.
And the safety situation, where does that leave that number 3 safety if Sidney Brown isn't available? Well, right now I would have to imagine that would be Avante Maddox or James Bradbury, probably Avante Maddox, which if you're that's a pretty busy role in that defense, being the third safety. So I don't know if you can afford to be the full-time nickel and kind of pivot off that and have to be that third safety. So I think they're trying to get Quinyon up to speed so that he gives you outside and inside versatility, and he can also help you in dime packages as well. It's smart, and they're really trying to gauge where each player is most comfortable, what can they do well, and how can we exploit that.
It's a fascinating question. Would Mitchell being the nickelback push Avante Maddox off the roster or just out to safety?
Could be off the roster, Jeff.
It could be.
Because you can get him on the practice squad. And all by if you're to look at earlier in the offseason when the Eagles released him, there weren't any suitors.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know how much that's going to change, as you move forward, because at the end of the summer, teams are more inclined to keep their own players than go outside the organization and get somebody else, because it's so hard to get up to speed when you need these guys to be able to help you right away.
Right. Right. And it's obviously by the juxtaposing of Rodgers and Ringo, they're giving both of these guys every opportunity to see how they hold up as outside corners. You do worry about Rodgers being 5'9". We'll see in the preseason. I'm sure he'll go up against some taller. I mean, any receiver is probably going to be taller than him these days because most receivers on the outside are 6 foot or taller, and he'll get a lot of opportunities to test himself against those guys.
That to me is where the question lies, because you saw it today on a jump ball in the end zone against somebody like AJ. Isaiah lost out on that one. That's the detriment of having an undersized player like that, 5'10", 175. For all the explosiveness and twitchiness and short area quickness, you give up physicality and you give up size. So that could also come into play as well. Whereas Ringo is sturdily built, he's 6 foot, 205, and he can run too. So that's where the appeal is with him. He was also a former draft, not a former, he was a draft pick of them in 2023. So he may get some deference there.
Right. Good stuff. Andrew, great stuff. It's been fun going through the team, the practices with you. I'm sure you'll be back on with me and Adam pretty soon. We'll do something, maybe at the end of camp, who knows, but obviously everybody can read your stuff at insidethebirds.com. He's writing every single day, multiple stories a day, just complete comprehensive. And he's a one-man show. You're a one-man show on insidethebirds.com. We thank you for everything you've been doing. You've been doing a great job.
Appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles intel. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the birds. Be sure to check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com. They're enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto. So make sure you check them out at phlsportsnation.com. and on Twitter at PHL Sports Nation.